Hello there everyone, welcome to Nightmare Narratives. I am your storyteller and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Victor Ravenhill, and I've been a park ranger at Glacier National Park for 17 years. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Avalanches that could bury a school bus, blizzards that lasted 2 weeks straight, tourists who wandered off trails and nearly froze to death before we found them. I was wrong, dead wrong. It happened in February of 1961, the worst winter Montana had seen in decades. Going to the San Road was buried under 8 feet of snow, and Logan Pass might as well have been on the moon. We'd been cut off at the Apgar Village Ranger Station for 3 weeks already, with no way in or out. The radio tower had gone down in an ice storm, and our satellite phone was down to its last few hours of battery. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that my daughter Jenny was visiting for her school break. First time since her mother died 2 years ago. At 16, she was old enough to understand why I'd thrown myself into work after the funeral, but not old enough to forgive me for it. This was supposed to be our chance to fix things. "Dad, it's like living in a snow globe," she said that morning, pressing her nose against the visitor center window. The glass was so thick with frost you could barely see outside, except the snow globe is trying to kill us. She had her mother's sense of humor, dark, but honest. "We'll be fine, sweetheart," I told her, checking the weather report for the 100th time, -30 with the wind chill. Visibility near zero. Storm should break in a few days. That's when Joe Crowfeather showed up. Joe was one of the Blackfeet elders, maybe 70 years old, with hands like leather and eyes that seemed to see things the rest of us missed. He'd walked 5 miles through the storm to reach us, which should have been impossible for a man his age. "Victor," he said, shaking snow off his coat, "you need to keep the girl inside when the hunting moon rises." "What hunting moon?" I asked. Outside, the sky was solid gray, had been for days. "Tonight, moon's full behind the clouds. The McKisties will be hungry." I'd heard the stories before. Wolf spirits that hunted during the worst winters, taking people who wandered too far from safety. Every culture had their bogeymen, their explanations for why people died in the wilderness. It was easier than admitting that sometimes nature just won. "Joe, with respect, those are just stories." His expression didn't change. "You saved 47 people from avalanches. You know these mountains better than any white man alive, but you don't know everything." Before I could answer, the emergency radio crackled to life. "Missing persons report. 2 cross-country skiers, the Hendersons from Great Falls, were 3 days overdue from their backcountry permit. They should have been back Tuesday. It was Friday. I have to go look for them." I told Joe. "No, you don't." But I was already reaching for my gear. 17 years as a ranger, 4 years in Korea before that. I'd never left people behind, and I wasn't about to start. "Jenny, you stay here." I called to my daughter. "Emergency supplies are in the back room. If anything happens, if anyone comes looking for trouble, you lock that door and don't open it for anyone but me." "Dad, what kind of trouble could happen out here?" I looked at Joe. His weathered face was grim. "Just promise me," I said. The Hendersons' last known position was near Hidden Lake, about 6 miles from the station. In good weather, it was a nice day hike. In this storm, it might as well have been Siberia. I found their abandoned ski equipment a mile from the trailhead. Skis, poles, and one of their packs scattered in the snow like someone had just dropped everything and walked away. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was the tracks. The Henderson ski tracks led right up to where their gear was scattered, then just ... stopped. No sign of a struggle, no blood in the snow. But continuing past where their tracks ended, I found wolf prints, big ones, bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen, with claw marks that dug deep into the frozen ground. I followed the prints toward the tree line, my headlamp cutting through the falling snow. The wind was howling, but underneath it, I could swear I heard something else, like voices calling for help. That's when I noticed the silence. You know how quiet it gets in a heavy snowfall. This was different. This was like the whole forest was holding its breath. No wind in the trees. No snow crunching. Underneath the snowshoes, even my own breathing seemed muffled. The wolf tracks led up an impossible slope, straight up a cliff face that would challenge an experienced rock climber in summer, never mind in a blizzard. I stood there staring at those prints climbing the rock like gravity was just a suggestion. My compass started spinning, slow at first, then faster, like it couldn't decide which way was north. The metal got so cold, it burned my fingers through my gloves. I should have turned back right then, should have radioed for backup, except the radio was just static. Should have at least marked my position with GPS, except the screen was showing me coordinates that put me somewhere in Hudson Bay. Instead, I kept following the tracks. 2 miles deeper into the woods, I found something that made my blood freeze. A backpack hanging 50 feet up in a pine tree, its contents scattered below like confetti. Canned food, a sleeping bag, a family photo of the Hendersons with their 2 kids. No way an avalanche did that. Avalanches bury things. They don't hang them in trees. I was studying the scene when I heard it. A voice, clear as day, calling from deeper in the forest. "Help us, please, we're trapped." It sounded like Tom Henderson. I'd met him when he picked up his backcountry permit, a friendly guy in his 40s, who just wanted to show his wife the winter wilderness. "Tom," I called back, "where are you?" "Down here." In the ravine, I followed the voice through a stand of dead trees, their branches scraping at my coat like fingers. The snow was deeper here, up to my waist in places. My snowshoes kept breaking through the crust, and each step was a fight. Then I found the deer. It was lying in a perfect circle of smooth snow, no tracks leading in or out. The animal had been arranged, that was the only word for it, positioned like it was sleeping, but deer don't sleep on their backs with their legs crossed, and they definitely don't arrange themselves in patterns that hurt your eyes to look at. The wolf prints surrounded the deer in a perfect ring, each print exactly the same distance from the center, each print the size of a dinner plate. "Help, we're right here." The voice was closer now, maybe 100 yards ahead, but something about it was wrong. Tom Henderson had a slight lisp. I remembered that from when we talked about trail conditions. This voice was too perfect, too clear. I checked my watch. I'd been hiking for 8 hours, but the light hadn't changed. If anything, it seemed to be getting brighter, like the snow was glowing from the inside. That's when the blizzard hit for real. Wind that knocked me sideways. Snow so thick I couldn't see my own feet. I had no choice but to make camp in the emergency shelter at Granite Creek, a little log building the Park Service maintained for situations exactly like this. I was setting up my sleeping bag when I heard the scratching on the roof. Slow, deliberate, like something with very large claws was testing the strength of the logs. The scratching went on for hours, not random, not frantic like an animal trying to get warm, methodical, like something was drawing patterns up there. I tried the radio again. Nothing but static, except for a few seconds when I could swear I heard howling. Howling that sounded almost like human voices, calling my name. Around midnight, I saw the first shadow. It passed by the window, tall enough that its head was out of frame. The shelter windows were 7 feet off the ground. I grabbed my flashlight and checked outside. Nothing, no tracks in the fresh snow. But as I watched, more shadows began circling the building, huge shapes moving just at the edge of my vision. There when I wasn't looking directly, gone when I turned my head. That's when I found the old report. It was tucked into the emergency supply box, yellowed paper with confidential Park Service, internal stamped across the top. Dated February 1935. Asterisk 3 members of the Civilian Conservation Corps found dead near Hidden Lake. Bodies arranged in ritual formation. Cause of death undetermined. Local Blackfeet elder insists winter spirits. Responsible. Recommend incident be classified as avalanche fatality to avoid public panic. Superintendent William Morton asterisk. The report included photos, black and white, grainy, but clear enough. 3 young men positioned exactly like the deer I'd found earlier, and surrounding them, those same impossibly large wolf prints. A sound outside made me look up from the report. Scratching, but not on the roof, on the walls. All around the cabin, like a dozen somethings were trying to claw their way in. I pressed my face to the window and nearly screamed. Tom Henderson was standing in the snow outside, waving at me. His wife Susan was next to him, both of them smiling like they'd just finished a pleasant hike instead of being missing for 3 days in a blizzard. "Victor," Tom called. his voice muffled by the glass. "Thank God you found us. We got turned around in the storm. Can you let us in?" I stared at them. They weren't wearing coats, no hats, no gloves. The temperature outside was -30, and they were standing there in summer clothes like it was a warm spring day. "Where have you been?" I called back. "We found a cave," Susan said. "It was warm inside. We've been waiting for help." They looked normal, sounded normal, but something was wrong. With their eyes, they reflected light like an animal's, silver in the beam of my flashlight. "I'll radio for a helicopter," I said. "Soon as the storm breaks." "No need," Tom said, and his smile got wider. "Too wide. We can show you the cave. It's safe there, warm. Your daughter would like it." My blood went cold. "How do you know about my daughter?" But they were already walking away, disappearing into the storm like they'd never been there at all. I spent the rest of the night checking and rechecking the locks, my rifle loaded and ready, but the scratching had stopped. The shadows were gone. Outside, the storm raged on, but the cabin was silent, until I heard Jenny's voice. "Dad, Dad, are you out there?" She sounded terrified, like she was crying. The voice was coming from right outside the door. "Jenny," I called back. "How did you get here?" "They're in the visitor center, Dad. The wolves. They're trying to get in." I ran, but they followed me. "Please, I'm so cold." Every instinct told me to open that door. My daughter was out there, freezing to death while I cowered in a cabin. But I remembered Joe's warning, and I remembered Tom and Susan's silver eyes. "Jenny, what was your mother's favorite song?" Silence. Then, in a voice that was definitely not my daughter's, "Let me in, Victor. The hunt is beginning." The next morning, I found the first body. Tom Henderson was buried in a snow cave a quarter mile from the shelter. He'd been dead for days, torn apart by something with claws and teeth, but he'd been arranged carefully, positioned like he was praying, and carved into the ice above him, in letters 3 feet tall, was a message. "The winter demands payment." I was staring at those words when it spoke to me. "You understand now?" I spun around, rifle raised. The thing standing behind me was 12 feet tall, balanced on its hind legs like a man. Its fur was white as the snow around us, and its eyes were the silver of moonlight on ice. When it opened its mouth, I could see teeth like icicles. "You're the McKisties," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I am the guardian of the winter hunting grounds," it said, its voice like wind through frozen trees. "When the storms are harshest, when the cold bites deepest, I collect what is owed. The Hendersons didn't owe you anything. Everyone who enters the wilderness in winter owes me." The creature said, "Some pay with fear, some with respect, and some ... It gestured toward Tom's body. "Some pay with everything. What do you want?" "Your daughter grows cold and afraid. The visitor center will not protect her much longer. I offer you a choice. Victor Ravenhill, your life for hers. Join my hunt willingly, and she lives. Refuse, and you both become part of the winter forever." I thought about Jenny, alone in that building, probably watching the windows for wolves that looked like people. I thought about my wife, how she'd never forgive me if I let our daughter die because I was too stubborn to accept help. If I agree, you leave her alone forever. She will be marked as protected. No winter spirit will touch her. And what happens to me? The creature's smile was terrible. "You become what I am. Guardian of the hunting grounds. Collector of the winters. Do it is not a kind existence, but it is existence." I lowered my rifle. "I accept. You must mean it, Victor. No fear, no hesitation. The winter can smell doubt." I thought about Jenny's laugh, the way she wrinkled her nose when she was thinking hard about something. I thought about all the people I'd saved over the years, all the families who got to go home because I was willing to risk everything to find them. "I'm not afraid," I said, and meant it. The creature studied me for a long moment. Then it nodded. "The bargain is made." It reached out with one massive claw and touched my forehead. The cold that flooded through me was beyond anything I'd ever experienced. Not the cold of winter air or mountain snow, but the cold of the spaces between stars. The cold of death itself. When it was over, I was still standing, still breathing, but I could feel the change beginning. "You have 10 years, the creature said, 10 years to prepare. Then you join the hunt permanently." It began to fade, becoming translucent like moonlight through clouds. "Find willing sacrifices, Victor. Find those who offer themselves to save others. The winter feeds on love as much as fear. Then it was gone, and I was alone with the dead. The official report listed the Hendersons as avalanche victims. Body never recovered, presumed buried under tons of snow and ice. The Park Service was very understanding about these things. They'd had practice. Jenny was safe when I got back to the visitor center, though she claimed she'd heard wolves howling all night. She also said I looked different, that my eyes seemed brighter in certain light. "Dad, are you okay? You look ... older." I was older. I could feel it in my bones, see it when I caught my reflection. The creature's touch had marked me, started a clock I couldn't stop. We left Glacier that spring. I requested a transfer, told them I needed a change after my wife's death. They were understanding about that too. But I came back every winter. I had to. The thing that called itself the Guardian wasn't gone, just waiting. And there were others like it in other parks, other wild places where winter bit deep and people sometimes disappeared. I learned to find them, the ones who were ready to sacrifice themselves for others. Grieving parents who'd lost children, soldiers carrying too much guilt, people who understood that sometimes love means letting go. It's not a job I wanted, but it's the job I have. Every winter, I help the spirits find what they need, and innocent people get to live. It's not a perfect system, but it's the only one we have. Jenny's grown now, married, with kids of her own. She never visits me in winter, and I'm glad. The change is almost complete. My hair went white last year, and sometimes I catch myself walking on 4 legs instead of 2, but she's safe. That was the deal, and the winter keeps its bargains. I've met others like me over the years, rangers, guides, search and rescue volunteers, all of us marked, all of us counting down to the day we join the hunt permanently. We have a network now, quiet communications about which parks need watching, which spirits need feeding. Most people never know we exist. They hike their trails, take their pictures, go home to their warm houses with stories about the majesty of nature. And that's fine. They don't need to know about the things that hunt in the deep cold, or the people who keep them satisfied. That winter is coming again. I can feel it in my bones, in the silver that's starting to show around my pupils. Maybe 5 more years before the change is complete. Maybe 10 if I'm lucky. But Jenny's children will never have to worry about the wolves. That walk like men, that's worth whatever I'd become. That's worth everything. Asterisk author's note. This account was found among the papers of Victor Ravenhill after his disappearance during a winter storm in Glacier National Park, 1971. Park Service records confirm his employment and exemplary service record, but list his cause of death as exposure during search and rescue operation. No body was ever recovered. Asterisk. My name is Margaret Stonefield, and I've been a ranger at Mount Rainier for 12 years. Back in 1973, I was the only woman doing this job in the whole park. Most folks thought I didn't belong up there, but I proved them wrong every day. I had my geology degree and knew these mountains better than anyone. That August was different. The heat wave hit us hard, making the glaciers melt faster than I'd ever seen. Rocks fell like rain from the cliffs, and the air tasted like dust and danger. I was working alone at our research station up at 10,000 feet, taking readings on the glacier movements. My radio barely worked up there, and the nearest help was 2 days away on foot. The morning everything started, I was checking my equipment when old Joseph Clearwater showed up. He was a Puyallup elder who sometimes guided tourists, but he looked scared that day, real scared. "You need to leave this mountain," he told me, his weathered hands shaking as he pointed up toward the peak. "The stones are angry. They'll start walking like men soon." I'd heard the old stories before. Giant creatures living in the rocks, protecting the mountain. I always figured they were just ways to explain climbing accidents and the weird things that happen when you get too much thin air in your lungs. "Joseph, it's just the heat making things unstable," I said, showing him my seismic readings. "The rocks expanding and contracting. That's what's causing the falls." He shook his head. "My grandfather saw them once. Big as trees, made of stone and shadow. They don't like what you're doing up here." After he left, I tried to focus on my work, but something felt wrong. The birds had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. My instruments kept giving me strange readings, like something heavy was walking round the mountain, but I couldn't see anything. That afternoon, the radio crackled to life. A group of university students had gone up to attempt the summit. 5 kids from Seattle, full of energy and big plans. They should have been back at base camp by now. I grabbed my gear and started climbing. The heat made every step feel like I was breathing through wet cloth. As I got higher, I found their first camp. Everything was there. Tents, food, climbing gear, but no students. Their equipment was scattered like a giant hand had swept through the site. Then I saw the footprint. It was pressed deep into the mud near their fire pit, 24 inches long, with 5 toe marks that looked almost human but way too big. The stride between prints suggested something 12 feet tall had walked through their camp. I knelt down and touched the edge of the print. The mud was still soft, which meant whatever made it had been there recently, real recently. That's when I heard the echo. "Help us, please. Somebody help us." It was coming from up the mountain, bouncing off the rocks in a way that made it sound like it was everywhere at once. One of the students calling for help, but the voice seemed to come from 3 different directions, like the mountain itself was playing tricks. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Stonefield. I've found the student camp. They're not here, but I'm hearing distress calls. Going up to investigate." Static answered me back, then a voice that might have been my supervisor, but the words were broken up. ... Told you to wait. ... Backup coming. Don't go alone. ... I should have listened. I should have waited. But those kids were up there somewhere, and every minute counted in a situation like this. I started climbing toward the voices, following a trail of scattered gear that led up toward the glacier. The sun was getting low when I found the first real sign of what had happened. A climbing helmet, crushed, flat, like someone had stepped on a tin can. But when I picked it up, I saw something that made my blood freeze. There was a handprint pressed into the metal. 5 fingers, each one as thick as my wrist, had grabbed that helmet and squeezed it until the metal bent like paper. No human being could do that, no animal either. As darkness fell over Mount Rainier, I realized Joseph had been right. There was something on this mountain, something that didn't want us here, and those 5 students had found it first. I set up my camp near the crushed helmet as night fell. The temperature dropped fast up there, and my breath came out in white puffs. I kept my flashlight close and tried the radio every few minutes, but got nothing but static, mixed with sounds that might have been wind or might have been something breathing. Around midnight, I heard them again. The voices: "Margaret, over here. Help us, we're trapped." But now I could tell something was wrong with how they sounded. The voices were too clear, like someone was playing a recording through speakers hidden in the rocks, and they were coming from different places than before. Some from up the glacier, some from down in the valley, one that seemed to come from right under my tent. I unzipped my tent flap and looked out. The moon was full, turning the glacier into a field of silver. At first, everything looked normal. Then I saw the rocks. They were arranged in a pattern that hadn't been there when I made camp. Big boulders, each one the size of a car, set up in a perfect circle around my tent. They'd been moved without making a sound, placed while I was sleeping. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out to examine them. The rocks were covered in scratches that looked almost like writing, symbols I didn't recognize, carved deep into the stone. But as I studied them closer, I realized they were similar to the old pictographs I'd seen in other parts of the park, the ones that showed giant figures protecting the mountains. That's when I saw the silhouette. It stood on the ridge above me, backlit by the moon. 15 feet tall, broad shoulders, arms that hung down almost to its knees. For just a second, it looked like a man, a really big man standing very still. Then it moved. It didn't walk or run. It flowed across the rocks like water, covering ground that should have taken minutes in just seconds. It leaped over a crevasse that was at least 50 feet wide, landing without a sound on the other side. I blinked, and it was gone. My hands were shaking as I packed up my camp. Those students were still out there, but I was starting to understand that whatever had taken them wasn't going to negotiate. It was hunting, and now it knew I was here too. I started climbing at first light, following the trail of scattered equipment. The students had dropped things as they ran, a water bottle here, a pack there, like breadcrumbs leading up into the high country. But the spacing was all wrong. The gear was scattered across distances that would have taken hours to cover, dropped in places no human could have reached. I found Sarah Morrison's backpack wedged into a crack in the rock face, 30 feet up a sheer cliff. Inside was her journal, and the last entry made my skin crawl. Asterisk, something's following us. Jake saw it first, moving through the rocks below our camp. We thought it was another climber until we got a good look through the binoculars. It's not human. God help us. It's not human at all. We're going to try to reach the ranger station. If anyone finds this... Asterisk, the entry ended there, but the page was torn and stained with something dark. I kept climbing, and that's when I found the cave. It was hidden behind a curtain of ice that had formed where meltwater ran down the rock face. Inside, the walls were covered with paintings that looked ancient. Figures of giants walking among the peaks, protecting the mountain from smaller human shapes. At the center was a painting that showed the giants collecting bones, arranging them in patterns around the high places. In the back of the cave, I found Tommy Chen. He was sitting upright against the wall, his climbing gear still on, his eyes wide open. At first, I thought he was alive, just in shock. Then I got closer and saw that his chest wasn't moving. He'd been dead for hours, maybe since yesterday, but he wasn't hurt. No injuries, no signs of violence. He looked like he'd just sat down to rest and never got back up, except for his expression. Pure terror, frozen on his face like he'd seen something that stopped his heart. "Tommy," I whispered, even though I knew he couldn't hear me. "What did you see?" That's when I heard the breathing. Deep, slow breaths that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The sound echoed through the cave, getting louder. Something was in there with me, something big enough that its breathing moved air around me. I spun around, flashlight beam dancing across the painted walls. Nothing, but the breathing continued, and now I could hear footsteps. Heavy steps that made pebbles rain down from the ceiling. I ran. Behind me, the cave mouth exploded outward as something massive burst through the ice curtain. I didn't look back, just ran across the glacier as fast as my legs could carry me. The footsteps followed, each one hitting the ground like a small earthquake. I made it to an ice bridge that crossed a deep crevasse. Halfway across, I finally turned around. It stood at the edge of the glacier, watching me. In daylight, I could see it clearly for the first time. It looked like a man, but built from stone and shadow. Its skin was the color of granite, and its eyes glowed like coals in a fire. When it opened its mouth, I saw teeth like broken rock, but the worst part was its intelligence. This wasn't just some animal protecting its territory. It was thinking, planning. It had herded me to this exact spot for a reason. The creature raised one massive arm and pointed at the ice bridge under my feet. Then it smiled, showing all those stone teeth. The bridge cracked. I ran the last 20 feet as the ice collapsed behind me, chunks of glacier crashing down into the crevasse. When I reached the other side, I looked back. The creature was gone, but I could hear its laughter echoing off the mountain walls. 4 students were still missing, and now I knew what had taken them wasn't going to let any of us leave. This mountain alive, the research station sat on a flat shelf of rock at 10,000 feet, my home away from home for the past month. It was just a small building made of stone and steel, but it felt like a fortress as I barricaded myself inside. I had food for a week, radio equipment, and my geological instruments. Everything I needed to wait for backup, except the radio wasn't working anymore. Every time I tried to call for help, I got the same thing. Static, mixed with voices that sounded like the missing students. They called my name, begged for help, screamed warnings I couldn't understand. But underneath their voices was something else. A deep rumbling sound, like the mountain itself was laughing. On my second night in the station, things got worse. I was checking my seismic equipment when the needles started going crazy. The readings showed massive impacts all around the building, like something the size of a truck was walking in circles around me. But when I looked out the windows, I saw nothing. Then the walls started shaking. Not from an earthquake. I knew what those felt like. This was pressure, applied slowly and deliberately. Something was testing the building, pressing against the walls with enormous hands. I could hear the steel frame creaking under the weight. In the morning, I found the handprints. They were pressed into the steel siding outside, each finger mark dented deep into the metal. The creature had been touching my shelter all night, feeling for weak spots. Learning I found Lisa Park that afternoon. She was in a crevasse about a quarter mile from the station, her body wedged between the ice walls like she'd been placed there carefully. Like Tommy, she showed no signs of violence, but her climbing gear was arranged around her in a pattern. Ropes coiled in spirals, ice axes planted in the glacier at precise angles, carabiners hung from the ice like decorations. It was making art from their belongings. creating monuments. The worst part was her face. She looked peaceful, almost happy, like whatever had killed her had shown her something beautiful right before the end. I heard Jake Martinez that night. His voice came from right outside my window, clear as day. "Margaret, please let me in. I'm hurt. It's still out there." I almost opened the door. The voice was perfect, exactly how Jake sounded. Scared, tired, human. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way he said my name, like he was reading it off a card instead of talking to someone he knew. "Jake, how did you get here?" I called through the door. "I've been hiding in the rocks. Please, Margaret, it killed the others. Don't let it get me too." I looked out the window. Nobody there. But Jake's voice was coming from right outside the door. "Jake, what's my middle name?" Silence then. "Margaret, please, I'm bleeding." I'd never told Jake my middle name. Never told any of the students. The thing outside was using Jake's voice, but it didn't know Jake's memories. The voice changed then, becoming deeper, rougher, not quite human anymore. Margaret Elaine Stone, born in Spokane, divorced from Robert Stonefield in 1969, Ph.D. in geology from the University of Washington, currently assigned to Glacial Monitoring Station 7. It knew everything about me, every detail from my personnel file, probably every detail from my whole life. The creature had been watching, learning, preparing. "What do you want?" I asked. "This mountain is sacred. Your kind brings poison machines, noise, scars and a stone. We are its guardians. We keep the balance." The voice was coming from all around me now, echoing off the rocks, multiple voices, speaking in harmony. There wasn't just one creature. There were several, maybe many. The students were just climbing. They weren't hurting anything. Every step wounds the stone. Every breath steals the mountain's air. You bring more of your kind, always more. Soon they will tear the mountain apart for the metal in its bones. I thought about the mining surveys I'd been doing, the reports I'd filed about mineral deposits in the glacier. The creature was right. There were companies interested in what was under Mount Rainier, companies that would strip mine the whole mountain if they thought it was profitable. "I can stop them," I said. "I can make sure no one comes here to mine." Laughter, like boulders rolling down a cliff. "You have no power among your people. You are just one small voice." "Then what do you want from me?" "Proof. Show your people what happens to those who wound the mountain. Make them afraid to come here." I understood then. The creature didn't just want to kill me. It wanted me to go back and tell others what I'd seen, to spread fear, to make people avoid the mountain entirely. But first, it wanted to show me exactly what I'd be warning them about. The building shook as something massive struck the roof. Chunks of stone rained down from the ceiling. Through the window, I could see shapes moving across the glacier, tall figures that seemed to be made of living rock, their eyes glowing like stars. They were coming for me, and there was nowhere left to run. One of them appeared at my window, its face pressed against the glass. It looked almost human, but its skin was rough granite, and its eyes were holes filled with fire. When it spoke, its voice shook the building. "Come outside, Margaret Stonefield. It is time for you to understand." I opened the door, because I had no choice. The creatures surrounded my research station, their massive forms blotting out the stars. Up close, they were even more incredible and terrifying. Some looked almost human, just scaled up to giant size. Others were more abstract, rough approximations of the human form carved from living stone. The largest one stepped forward. It had to be 18 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the moon. Its face was ancient, weathered like a cliff that had stood for thousands of years. When it spoke, the words seemed to come from deep underground. "I am first guardian of this peak. I have walked these stones since the mountain was young." "The students," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are they all dead?" "They sleep in the stone now. Their bones rest in sacred places. Their spirits join the mountain's strength. It is not death as your kind understands it. It is becoming." The creature gestured toward the glacier, and I saw them. Shapes moving under the ice, human figures preserved in perfect stillness. Lisa, Tommy, Jake, and the others. They weren't decomposing. They looked like they were just sleeping, waiting to wake up. "They were young," I said. "They had their whole lives ahead of them, and now they have eternity. Their energy feeds the mountain, keeps it strong against your kind's poison. They are honored above all others." Other guardians moved closer, forming a circle around us. Each one was different. Some looked like they'd been carved by wind and weather. Others seemed to shift and flow like they were made of liquid stone. But they all had those same burning eyes, that same ancient intelligence. You study our mountain, Stales said. You measure its bones, map its blood. Why? I thought about lying, but something told me these creatures would know. I'm looking for mineral deposits, rare earth elements, precious metals. It's my job. And when you find these treasures, what happens? I'd seen enough mining operations to know the answer. Companies come in, they dig, blast, strip away everything that's valuable. They leave behind holes and poison. Yes, and we cannot allow this. The Guardian reached into the stone at its feet and pulled out something that made me gasp. It was a chunk of glacier ice, but inside were veins of metal that glowed with their own light. The rare earth deposits I'd been mapping were beautiful beyond description, like captured starlight frozen in time. Your instruments detect only shadows of what lies beneath, Stales said. The mountain's true treasures are beyond your science. They are the source of our power, the reason we exist. Another Guardian spoke, its voice like grinding stone. For 200 years, we have hidden from your kind. We let them blame avalanches and accidents for the deaths of those who came too close. But now there are too many. Your people spread, like infection, across the sacred places. The mining companies will come regardless, I said. Even if you kill every person who sets foot on this mountain, they'll send armies if they think there's profit here. Perhaps, but armies can be buried under avalanches. Machines can fall into crevasses. Mountains are patient, and we are the mountains will. I realized they were right. These creatures had power I couldn't even understand. They could reshape the landscape, trigger natural disasters, make the mountain itself fight back against any invasion. But the cost would be enormous. Hundreds of deaths, maybe thousands. There has to be another way, I said. Stales studied me with those burning eyes. You care for this mountain. We feel it in your heart. You understand its moods, respect its power. This is why we offer you a choice, instead of simply adding your bones to our collection. What choice? Become our voice among your people. Return to them and speak of what you have seen. Make them fear this place, but also make them understand its value. Help us protect what is sacred. I thought about my career, my reputation. If I went back and told people about giant stone creatures living in the mountain, they'd think I'd lost my mind. I'd be fired, maybe institutionalized. But then I thought about the alternative. The mining companies would come, and these Guardians would fight back. The mountain would become a battlefield, and innocent people would die on both sides. If I do this, I said, if I help you protect the mountain, what happens to the students? Can you bring them back? The Guardians looked at each other, communicating in a language of stone grinding against stone. Finally, Stales shook his massive head. They are part of the mountain now. To wake them would be to wound the stone itself. But their sacrifice ensures that others will not need to join them. Their deaths will have meaning. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but I understood. Those 5 kids were gone, and nothing I did would bring them back. But I could make sure their deaths weren't meaningless. I could use their story to protect the mountain and prevent more tragedies. I'll do it, I said. I'll be your voice, but I need proof, something to show people that this is real. Stales smiled, an expression that looked strange on his stone features. He reached out and touched my forehead with one massive finger. The world exploded into light and sensation. I saw the mountain as it really was, not just rock and ice, but a living thing with its own consciousness. I felt its pain when machines bit into its slopes, its rage when pollution poisoned its streams. I understood that the Guardians weren't just protecting their home, they were part of the mountain itself, extensions of its will. When the vision ended, I was changed. I could feel the mountain's moods, sense its health like a doctor checking a patient's pulse. I would always know when it was threatened, and I would always feel compelled to defend it. Now you understand, Stales said. You are connected to this place forever. Its pain is your pain, its protection your sacred duty. The other Guardians began to fade back into the stone, their forms becoming indistinct in the pre-dawn darkness. Only Stales remained, watching me with those ancient eyes. Go now, he said. Tell your people what you have learned. But remember, we are always here, always watching. If you fail in your duty, if the mountain is wounded despite your efforts, you will join the students in their eternal rest. As the sun rose over Mount Rainier, I packed my gear and started the long climb down to civilization. Behind me, the mountain felt different, alive, aware, protected by guardians that existed beyond human understanding. I had a story to tell, and somehow I had to make people believe it. The Park Service Review Board thought I'd lost my mind. I sat in that sterile conference room in Seattle, facing 5 men in suits who looked at me like I was a mental patient. My supervisor, Frank Morrison, couldn't even meet my eyes. The official report I'd filed told the truth, all of it. The guardians, the students' bodies in the glacier, the supernatural forces protecting Mount Rainier. Rangers, the chief administrator said, his voice carefully neutral. Do you understand how this sounds? Giant stone creatures, supernatural guardians, bodies preserved in mystical ice. I understand it sounds impossible, I said. But it's what happened. The students are still missing, Frank said quietly. We've had search teams all over that area. No sign of them, no bodies, nothing. Because the guardians didn't want them. Found I knew that, but I couldn't explain it in a way these men would accept. The official search teams had been led away from the sacred places, guided by subtle rockfalls and weather changes that made certain areas seem too dangerous to explore. Heat exhaustion, the department psychologist suggested. Altitude sickness, combined with stress and isolation, it can cause very vivid hallucinations. My seismic equipment recorded the impacts, I said, pulling out my data sheets. Footsteps from something weighing several tons. The readings are all here. They looked at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. To them, they probably were. These were office men, administrators who understood budgets and personnel files, but had never spent a night alone on a mountain. Equipment malfunctions happen, the administrator said, especially in extreme weather conditions. In the end, they offered me early retirement with full benefits. A nice way of saying they thought I was crazy, but didn't want the publicity of firing their first female ranger. I could keep my pension, my dignity, and my mouth shut about what really happened on Mount Rainier. I turned them down. I'm going back to work, I said, and I'm going to make sure those mining surveys get buried so deep they'll never see daylight. That's when they fired me. The news story was small, buried on page 6 of the Seattle Times. Female ranger dismissed after breakdown. They made it sound like the stress of being a woman in a man's job had finally gotten to me. Frank gave a quote about how proud they were of my years of service and how they hoped I'd get the help I needed. Nobody wanted to hear about the guardians. But I didn't give up. I couldn't. The mountain wouldn't let me. Every morning I woke up feeling its presence, sensing its moods like weather in my bones. When mining companies filed permits for exploratory drilling, I felt the mountain's pain like physical wounds. When hikers planned to climb in the sacred areas, I felt its anger building like pressure in a volcano. I started small. Anonymous tips to environmental groups about sensitive wildlife areas that needed protection. Phone calls to reporters about the cultural significance of Mount Rainier to local tribes. Letters to editors about the importance of preserving wilderness areas. Nobody knew it was me, the crazy ex-ranger with her stories about stone giants. The mining permits got delayed, tied up in environmental reviews and cultural impact studies. Climbing routes were closed for geological instability. Slowly, quietly, the mountain's most sacred places were being protected. It took 3 years, but I found allies, other rangers and park employees who'd had strange encounters they couldn't explain. A Forest Service geologist who'd recorded similar seismic anomalies near Mount Shasta. A tribal historian who told me about guardian spirits. That matched my descriptions exactly. We never talked about it openly. We didn't form a group or make official reports, but we watched over the sacred places, using our professional positions to create barriers and delays whenever someone threatened them. The students' families never got closure. Lisa Park's parents came to see me once, desperate for answers about their daughter's disappearance. I wanted to tell them she was safe, that she'd become part of something eternal and beautiful. But I knew they'd never understand. She loved the mountains, her mother said, crying in my living room. She said they made her feel close to God. They did, I told her. Lisa found something up there that most people never do. She found her place in the world. It wasn't much comfort, but it was all I could give them. The nightmares stopped. After 5 years, not because I'd forgotten what happened, but because I'd accepted my role. I was the mountain's voice in the human world, its guardian in the realm of permits and politics. Every day I felt its presence. Every night I dreamed of stone halls and ancient wisdom. Sometimes, late at night, I'd drive up to the park and walk the lower trails, just me and the mountain, having our quiet conversations. I'd tell it about the threats I'd deflected, the victories we'd won. And sometimes, if I was very still and very quiet, I'd hear the voices of the guardians on the wind. Well done, Margaret Stonefield. The mountain remembers your loyalty. I never saw Styles again, but I knew he was there. They were all there, watching and waiting, ready to defend their sacred home against any threat. The mining companies had given up on Mount Rainier years ago, declaring it too unstable and politically sensitive for development. They were right about the unstable part. The mountain would fight back against anyone who tried to wound it, and it had allies now, human allies who understood the price of progress and the value of sacred places. The 5 students were still there too, sleeping in the glacier, their spirits woven into the mountain's strength. I visited their memorial every year on the anniversary of their disappearance. Their families thought I was just another ranger paying respects, but I was really checking on old friends. I never married again, never had children. The mountain was my family now, the guardians my closest companions. It was a lonely life sometimes, but it was the life I'd chosen, the life I'd been called to. And on clear nights, when the moon shone bright on the glacier, I could swear I saw them moving in the ice. 5 young faces, smiling and peaceful, surrounded by light that seemed to come from within the mountain itself. They'd found their place in the world too. We all had. The mountain still stands, untouched and sacred, protected by guardians both ancient and modern. And somewhere in the stone halls beneath the glacier, the bone collectors keep their eternal watch, making sure the balance between worlds remains intact. That's my story. Believe it or don't, the mountain doesn't care about your skepticism. It only cares about its survival. And so do I. My name is Raymond Elkhart, and I've been a forest ranger for 14 years. I work in the Chequamegon National Forest in Wisconsin, where the winters can kill you if you're not careful. People think being a ranger is just about campfires and lost hikers, but they don't know about the real stuff. The stuff that happens when the snow gets deep and the cold gets mean. I'm Ojibwe, born and raised near the Lac du Flambeau Reservation. My great-grandfather used to tell stories about the old days, about things that walked in the woods when people got hungry enough. I always thought they were just stories. January 1987 was the worst winter I'd ever seen. The temperature had been sitting at 40 below for 3 weeks straight. The snow was so deep that supply trucks couldn't get through. Even the snowplows gave up trying to clear the back roads. I was stuck at the remote research station near the old logging camps, the ones that shut down back in the 1920s. My wife Sarah kept calling on the radio, worried about me and the boys. My twin sons were only 8 then, and they wanted to know when Daddy was coming home. I told them soon, but I wasn't sure if that was true. The weather report said it might be another week before the roads opened. That's when the first call came in. It was Elder Margaret Skinaway from the reservation. Her voice crackled through the emergency radio, full of static and fear. "Raymond, you need to listen to me," she said. "The hungry ghost is walking again. Stay away from the old logging camp. Don't go near the frozen lake." I knew what she meant by hungry ghost. In Ojibwe, we call it Wendigo, a creature that comes when people get so hungry they eat other people. It's supposed to be a curse, turning humans into monsters that can never be full. "Elder Margaret, I'm sure it's just your great-grandfather knew." She cut me off. "He fought one in 1889. Same place, same time of year, the starving season." The radio went dead. I tried to call her back, but the storm was getting worse. The wind was howling so loud it shook the whole research station. I made some coffee and tried to think. Elder Margaret wasn't the type to make things up. She was one of the most respected people on the reservation. Then the second call came in. "Ranger Station, this is Deputy Morrison from the county sheriff. We got a family reported missing. Ice fisherman. Truck was found abandoned near Flambeau Lake. Doors torn off from the inside." My blood went cold. Flambeau Lake was right next to the old logging camp. "Any sign of the family?" I asked. "Negative. Search and rescue can't get through until the storm passes. You're the closest person to their last known location." I looked out the window at the blizzard. In weather like this, a family could freeze to death in hours, but something about those torn doors bothered me. You don't tear truck doors off. from the inside, not unless you're really desperate to get out, or really desperate to get in. I loaded my snowmobile with emergency supplies and headed out at first light. The storm had calmed down enough to travel, but the wind still cut through my winter gear like knives. The forest was dead quiet, except for the sound of my engine. That should have been my first warning. In 14 years of winter rescues, I'd never seen the woods so empty. No rabbit tracks, no deer trails, not even crow calls. It was like every living thing had packed up and left. I found the abandoned truck half buried in snow near the lake shore. The doors were definitely torn off from the inside. Metal twisted outward like something had punched through from within. But the really weird part was what I found inside. The truck was full of fishing gear, but it looked like someone had gone crazy trying to eat it all. Tackle boxes were ripped open and emptied. There were teeth marks on plastic lures. Even the foam bait containers had been chewed up and swallowed. I followed footprints leading away from the truck toward the lake. 3 sets at first, a man, woman, and child. But the prints got stranger as I followed them. They started normal, then got longer and wider. By the time they reached the ice fishing holes, they didn't look human anymore. The holes in the ice told their own story. Someone had been fishing, but they'd gotten desperate, really desperate. I found gnawed fish bones scattered around, but also something else, something that made my stomach turn. Human finger bones, small ones, like from a child. I tried to start my snowmobile to call for backup, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The fuel gauge showed full, but it was like the gas had frozen solid. That was impossible. I used special winter fuel that worked down to 60 below. That's when I heard the crying. It was coming from the old logging camp, maybe half a mile through the trees. A child's voice, weak and scared. I grabbed my emergency pack and started running through the snow. The logging camp had been abandoned for over 60 years, but the main building was still standing. The crying was coming from inside. I pushed open the door and called out, "Hello, anyone there? This is Ranger Elkhart." The crying stopped. I turned on my flashlight and swept it around the room. The place was a mess, old furniture knocked over, broken glass everywhere, but in the beam of my light, I saw them. Bones, lots of bones, arranged in neat piles against the walls. Some were old, yellow with age. Others looked fresh, too fresh. I knelt down next to one pile and examined them closer. They were human bones, but they'd been gnawed clean. Not by animals. The marks were wrong for that. These looked like they'd been chewed by human teeth. That's when I found the family. What was left of them was in the back room, arranged around a cold fireplace like they'd been having dinner. The parents were just bones now. But the child had only been partially eaten. I ran outside and threw up in the snow. When I came back in, something had changed. The bone piles had been moved, rearranged, and carved into the wooden wall above the fireplace were fresh words. Still hungry, I tried to run back to my snowmobile, but the storm had picked up again. The wind was so strong I could barely stand. By the time I made it back to where I'd left the machine, it was buried under 3 feet of new snow. I was trapped. As I dug frantically through the snow, I felt eyes watching me. I turned around and saw it standing at the edge of the trees. It looked like a person, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, like someone had stretched a human body until it was 8 feet long and covered it with skin that hung loose like old clothes. It was naked in the 40 below cold, but it didn't seem to mind. Steam rose from its body like it was burning up. Inside, its eyes glowed yellow in the darkness, and it was smiling at me with teeth that were too long and too sharp. I blinked, and it was gone. I gave up on the snowmobile and ran back to the logging camp. It was the only shelter for miles, and I needed to get out of the wind. But as I ran, I could hear footsteps following me through the snow. Long, loping steps that covered more ground than any human could manage. Inside the camp, I barricaded the door with old furniture and tried to make a fire. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely light the matches. When the flames finally caught, the temperature in the room should have started warming up. Instead, it got colder. My breath started showing even with the fire going. Ice crystals formed on the windows despite the heat. Whatever was outside was bringing the cold with it. I tried the radio, but all I got was static. Then, through the white noise, I heard a voice. Raymond. It was my great-grandfather's voice, but he'd been dead for 20 years. "Raymond, you need to listen. The Wendigo is here. It's been feeding all winter. Great-grandfather, I whispered. It starts with hunger. Makes people so hungry they'll eat anything, even each other. And once they taste human flesh, they change. They become like it. The fire suddenly flared higher, and in the flames I could see his face. Old and wrinkled, but his eyes were sharp and serious. How do I fight it? You remember the stories. Sacred fire, burn the flesh caches. But Raymond, his voice started fading. You've been exposed. You're already changing. The radio went dead, and I realized he was right. I hadn't eaten anything since morning, but I wasn't hungry for the food in my pack. I was hungry for something else. Something fresh and warm and red. I looked at the bone piles and felt my mouth. Water. That's when the thing outside started talking to me. Raymond, it called in a voice like wind through dead trees. You know what you want. You know what you need. I pressed my hands against my ears, but the voice came from inside my head now. Your wife, your boys. Imagine how tender they would be. How sweet. Stop it. I screamed. I can smell your hunger, Raymond. It's growing. Soon you'll be like me. Like all the others. Through the window, I could see shapes moving in the trees. More of them. Dozens of them. All the people who'd gone missing over the years changed into these hungry ghosts. Join us. They whispered together. Feed with us. The hunger was getting stronger. I could feel my teeth getting sharper. My nails growing into claws. The transformation was starting. I had to do something before it was too late. I remembered what my great-grandfather had said about flesh caches. The Wendigo stored meat to keep its power strong. If I could find them and burn them with sacred fire, maybe I could weaken it enough to escape. I grabbed a burning stick from the fireplace and went back outside. The creatures followed me as I searched the camp, but they kept their distance from the flame. I found the first cache buried under the snow behind the main building. Human body parts wrapped in old canvas. Frozen solid, I touched the flame to the canvas, and it caught fire immediately, burning with a bright white light. The Wendigo screamed, a sound like breaking glass and dying animals. You're making a mistake, Raymond, it called. You need that meat. You're starving, it was right. Looking at the burning flesh, all I wanted to do was grab it and eat it raw. But I forced myself to keep searching. I found 3 more caches around the camp and burned them all. With each fire, the Wendigo got weaker and the other creatures faded back into the trees. But I was getting weaker too. The hunger was eating me alive from the inside. By the time I burned the last cache, the main Wendigo was furious. It stepped out of the forest and showed itself fully for the first time. It was 18 feet tall, with arms that hung down to its knees. Its skin was grey and stretched tight over bones that stuck out like knives. Its face was a skull with yellow eyes, and a mouth full of teeth like broken glass. You think you've won? It laughed. You're already one of us. Feel the hunger, Raymond. Feel how it burns. It was right. The hunger was so strong now I could barely think. My vision was going red at the edges, and all I could think about was meat. Fresh meat. Human meat. Your great-grandfather tried to fight me too, the Wendigo said. In the end, he fed me his own brother. You're lying. Am I? Ask yourself why he really knew so much about fighting Wendigo. Why he had the sacred knowledge. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. My great-grandfather hadn't just fought a Wendigo in 1889. He'd been one. That's right, the creature grinned. It runs in families. The hunger, the change. You were always going to become like me. I felt my bones stretching, my skin getting tight. The transformation was almost complete. But then I remembered something else from the old stories. The Wendigo was bound by rules. It couldn't force people to eat human flesh. They had to choose it willingly. You can't make me, I said. I don't have to make you. You want to. Look. It gestured toward the camp, and I saw fresh meat laid out on a table that hadn't been there before. It smelled so good my mouth filled with saliva. Just one bite, the Wendigo whispered. Just one, and the hunger stops forever. I took a step toward the meat, then another. I could almost taste it, but then I heard voices calling my name. Sarah and the boys, from the radio back in the camp. Daddy, where are you? My sons called. We're scared. Raymond, please come home, Sarah cried. I realized this was the choice. I could feed the hunger and become a monster, or I could fight it and stay human. But fighting it might kill me. I looked at the fresh meat one more time. Then I picked up the last burning stick from the sacred fire. I choose my family, I said, and thrust the flame into the meat. The Wendigo screamed as its power source burned away. Its body started to dissolve, turning into smoke and shadow. "This isn't over," it hissed as it faded. "The hunger never dies. You'll be back." The forest went quiet. The other creatures were gone. I was alone, but I was still human. The rescue team found me 3 days later, nearly frozen to death in the logging camp. I told them I'd gotten lost in the storm and taken shelter. They found the burned remains of the flesh caches but assumed they were just old animal carcasses someone had been storing. The missing fishing family was listed as victims of exposure. Their bodies were never found. I went back to work after a week in the hospital, but things were different now. Every winter, when the temperature drops and the snow gets deep, I feel it stirring again, the hunger. It never completely went away. Sarah noticed the changes, how I stopped eating meat in the winter months, how I'd wake up screaming from dreams about feeding, how I'd disappear for days at a time, patrolling the old logging areas. We don't talk about it, but I know she's scared of me sometimes, especially when she catches me staring at her and the boys with eyes that are a little too hungry. The reservation elders know the truth. They call me when people go missing in the winter, when the stories start up again about things seen in the deep woods. I've dealt with 3 more Wendigo incidents over the years. Each time, it gets a little harder to resist. I keep in touch with other tribal rangers across the northern states. We have an unofficial network, watching for signs of the starving season, because the Wendigo isn't gone. It's just waiting for the next time someone gets hungry enough, waiting for the next time someone makes the choice. And sometimes, in the deepest part of winter when the temperature drops to 40 below and the wind howls through the trees, I wonder if I made the right choice at all. Because the hunger never really goes away, it just gets quieter, until the next starving season begins. My name is Ernest Blackstone, and I've been a park ranger at Mammoth Cave for 18 years. Before that, I spent 12 years mining coal in these same Kentucky hills. I know darkness like most people know daylight. I know the weight of stone above your head and the sound of water dripping in places where no human foot has walked for 1,000 years. People think cave rescue is glamorous work. They see the newspaper photos when we bring someone out alive, but they don't see the body we carry out in bags. They don't see the way darkness gets into your bones after you've spent 3 days crawling through passages barely wide enough for your shoulders, following the sound of someone calling for help that might already be dead by the time you reach them. I've mapped over 200 miles of cave passages in my time here. I've pulled 73 people out of situations that should have killed them. I know every twist and turn of the main tourist routes, and I know which passages are too dangerous for anyone but experienced cavers. What I didn't know was that some passages are too dangerous for anyone at all. It was October 1959 when it started. The autumn storms had been bad that year, flooding the lower entrances and making the underground rivers run wild. Water levels were rising in sections of the cave system that had been dry for decades. It made rescue work dangerous, but it also opened up new passages that had been sealed by debris for years. My daughter Sarah had just started working as a tour guide that season. She was 22 and stubborn as her mother had been. God rest her soul. Sarah wanted to prove she could carry on the family tradition, even though I'd rather she found work somewhere with actual sunlight. "Dad, I'm not scared of the dark," she'd tell me. "I grew up with your stories. I know these caves better than most people know their own houses." She was right about that. Sarah had been coming down into the easy passages since she was old enough to hold a flashlight, steady, but knowing the tourist routes and understanding the true nature of Mammoth Cave are 2 different things entirely. The Cherokee people who lived here first had stories about these caves. They called them the home of the Nanu, the immortal ones who lived in the darkness between worlds. Old Pete Crowfeather, who sometimes came by the ranger station, would shake his head whenever he saw tour groups heading underground. The old guardians are stirring. He told me that October, when the storms first started, too many lights in the sacred places, too many feet walking where they shouldn't walk. I'd always figured the Cherokee cave spirit stories were just ways to keep people out of dangerous, unexplored areas. Every culture has boogeymen to keep children from wandering into places that might kill them. But Pete wasn't talking to children. He was talking to me, and his eyes were serious in a way that made my skin crawl. "Ernest," he said, "you know these caves better than any white man alive. But there are things down there that your maps don't show. things that don't want to be found. I should have listened to him. The call came in at 2:47 a.m. on October 15th. Sarah's voice was shaking on the radio, barely coming through the static. "Dad, we need help down here. The Morrison tour group, they're missing." I was dressed and in my truck before she finished talking. The Morrison group was supposed to be a simple evening tour. 6 tourists from Chicago, led by Sarah through the frozen Niagara route. Easy passages, well lit, impossible to get lost. The kind of tours we could do blindfolded. But when I reached the cave entrance, I found Sarah sitting on a rock outside, wrapped in a blanket, with 3 deep claw marks running down her left arm. "What happened?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "I don't know." Her voice was barely a whisper. We were in the main chamber, and I was telling them about the formation history. Then the lights went out, all of them, at once. Not just the tour lights, but the emergency lighting too. Everything. Equipment failure. That's what I thought. I had my backup flashlight, and I called for everyone to stay calm. But when I got the light working, she stopped, staring at the cave entrance like it might swallow her whole. "Dad." They were gone. All 6 of them. Just gone. People don't just disappear, Sarah. They probably panicked and ran, got separated in the dark. I searched for 2 hours. I found their lights. Found them where? Arranged in a perfect circle in the middle of the chamber. Still working, still bright, but no people. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Show me." We assembled a search team, myself, 2 other rangers, and a volunteer caver who knew the system almost as well as I did. We went down with enough equipment to search for 3 days if necessary. Professional lights, rope, emergency supplies, and radio gear to keep in contact with the surface. The first thing I noticed was the sound. Mammoth Cave has its own acoustics. Every footstep, every voice, every drop of water has a particular echo pattern that you learn to read like a map. But something was wrong. Sounds were coming back distorted, like the cave walls had changed shape. We found the tourist lights exactly where Sarah had described them. 6 flashlights in a perfect circle, each one standing upright on its base, each one pointing toward the center of the circle. They'd been burning for hours, but the batteries were still strong. "This doesn't make sense," said Tom Rodriguez, my most experienced ranger. "Tourists don't arrange their equipment like this. They drop their lights and run." "Maybe they were trying to signal for help," suggested Marie Hawkins, our volunteer caver. "Signal who?" I asked. "And where are they now?" We spread out and searched every passage leading from the main chamber. The cave system is vast, over 400 miles of mapped passages, and probably twice that much still unexplored. But the tourist route is clearly marked, and there are only 3 ways to go from the main chamber. In the North Passage, we found a woman's purse. In the East Passage, a man's jacket. In the South Passage, a pair of eyeglasses, lens shattered. They split up, Tom said. Panic response. Got separated in the dark and went different directions. But I was looking at the cave walls, at scratches in the limestone that I'd never seen before. They were deep gouges running in parallel lines like claw marks, like something with very large claws had been sharpening them against the stone. "Tom," I called, "look at this." He came over with his light and whistled low. "What kind of animal makes marks like that?" "No animal I know, and no animal that should be living in these caves." We followed the claw marks deeper into the North Passage, beyond the tourist route, into sections of the cave that most people never see. The marks got deeper and more frequent. Some of them were fresh, stone dust still scattered on the cave floor beneath them. That's when we found the paintings. They were on a wall in a chamber that didn't appear on any of our maps. Ancient cave paintings, done in red ochre and charcoal, showing humanoid figures with wolf heads and massive claws. The style was unlike anything I'd seen in Cherokee art, older, more primitive, more frightening, and fresh. Some of the paint was still wet. "Jesus Christ," Marie whispered. "How old are these?" "Old enough that we should have known about them," I said. "This chamber isn't on any survey map." That's when the lights went out. Not some of them, all of them. Every flashlight, every headlamp, every piece of electrical equipment we were carrying. The darkness was complete and absolute. The kind of darkness that makes you forget which way is up. And in that darkness, something howled. The howl came from everywhere and nowhere. It echoed off the cave walls, bounced through passages, and seemed to come from inside the stone itself. It was the sound of something in pain, something angry, something that had been waiting in the dark for a very long time. Our lights came back on after maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. When we could see again, Tom was pressed against the cave wall, his face white as limestone. Marie was standing in the center of the chamber, turning in slow circles, with her light, searching for whatever had made that sound. "We need to get out of here," Tom said. "Right now." "We can't leave those tourists," I said. "They're down here somewhere." "Ernest, no tourists made that sound. No tourists painted these walls. No tourists arranged those lights in a perfect circle." He was right, but I couldn't abandon 6 people to whatever was moving through these caves. We were rangers. We had a job to do. We kept searching, but now we moved carefully, staying close together, checking every shadow twice. The claw marks were everywhere now, and they were getting deeper. Some of them had torn through limestone like it was soft wood. In the East Passage, we found the first body. It was Robert Morrison, the tour group leader. His body was in a small chamber off the main route, arranged carefully on a natural stone shelf like it was lying in state. His clothes were intact, but he was dead, eyes wide open, staring at the cave ceiling. "Heart attack?" Marie asked, but her voice was shaking. I knelt beside the body and checked for obvious injuries. No wounds, no broken bones, no signs of violence. But his face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, and his hair had gone completely white. "People don't go grey overnight," Tom said. "Not unless they see something that scares them to death." We found the second body in the South Passage. Margaret Morrison, Robert's wife, lying in exactly the same position on another stone shelf. Same expression of terror, same white hair, same lack of obvious cause of death. "This is ritual," Marie said. "Someone is arranging these bodies." "Something," I corrected. "Look at the walls. The claw marks were fresh here, and they formed patterns. Not random scratches, but deliberate symbols carved deep into the stone. And around each stone shelf where we'd found a body, the symbols formed a circle." "We need to call for backup," Tom said. "Radio's dead," Marie reported. "Has been since the lights went out." "Then we need to get to the surface and call for help." "No," I said. "We finished the search. 4 people are still missing." "Ernest, this is insane. We're not equipped for this. We don't even know what we're dealing with." That's when we heard the voices. They were coming from deeper in the cave system, from passages that weren't on any map. Human voices, calling for help, echoing through the darkness, the voices of the missing tourists. "Help us," came a woman's voice. "Please, we're lost. We're so cold." "This way," called a man. "We're down here. Please hurry." Tom grabbed my arm. "Don't listen to them. Something's wrong with those voices." He was right. The voices were too clear, too perfect. Sound doesn't carry that way in caves. It bounces and distorts, changes pitch and volume. These voices sounded like they were coming from speakers, artificial and strange. But they were also coming from 3 different directions at once. "Hello," Marie called back. "Where are you?" "Down here," came the woman's voice again. But now it was coming from behind us. "Hurry, please, it's so dark." We turned our lights toward the voice, but the passage behind us was empty. When we turned back, the passage ahead was empty too, but the voices continued, always moving, always calling, always leading us deeper into unmapped territory. "We're being herded," Tom realized. "Something is driving us away from the main passages." "Then we go back," I said. "Right now." But when we turned around, the passage we'd come from was blocked. A wall of loose stone and debris had somehow appeared, sealing off our escape route. "That wasn't there 10 minutes ago," Marie said. Caven Tom suggested, but his voice was doubtful. "No," I said, examining the blockage. "This was arranged. Look at how the stones are placed. This is deliberate." The voices were getting closer now, and I could hear something else moving in the darkness. Something large, something that walked on 2 legs but didn't move like a human. The footsteps were too heavy, too deliberate, and they were coming from multiple directions. "We need to find another way out," I said. "What about the voices?" Marie asked. "What if some of those tourists are still alive?" "Those aren't tourists," Tom said. "Listen to them." The voices had changed. They were still calling for help, but now they were using our names. "Ernest," came the woman's voice. "Ernest, help me. I'm hurt." "Tom," called the man. "Tom, over here. I found a way out." Marie whispered a third voice, so close it seemed to be coming from right beside her ear. "Marie, don't trust them. They're not human." We stood back to back in the small chamber, lights pointing in 3 directions, waiting for whatever was stalking us to show itself. The voices had stopped, but the footsteps were getting closer. That's when I saw the eyes. They reflected our lights like mirrors, but they were red instead of white. 2 eyes, then 4, then 6, watching us from the darkness just beyond our light beams. They were too high off the ground to belong to any normal animal, and they moved with an intelligence that made my blood run cold. "Jesus," Tom whispered. "What are those things?" The eyes moved closer, and I could see shapes in the darkness. Tall, humanoid figures covered in dark fur, with elongated limbs and faces that were part human, part wolf. They moved through the narrow cave passages like liquid, flowing around obstacles that should have blocked their path. "Cherokee Cave Guardians," I said, remembering Pete Crowfeather's warnings. "The Nanu, that's folklore," Marie said. "That's not real." "Real enough," I said, as the creatures stepped into our light. There were 3 of them, and they were the most terrifying things I'd ever seen in 18 years of cave rescue. They stood nearly 10 feet tall, with powerful bodies covered in dark, matted fur. Their faces were elongated like wolves, but their eyes held human intelligence. Ancient, angry intelligence that had been waiting in the darkness for decades. The largest one stepped forward and spoke in a voice like grinding stone, mixing broken English with Cherokee words I didn't understand. "Desecrators," it said, "disturbers of the sacred dead. You bring light to places that should remain dark. You bring tourists to burial grounds that should be left in peace." "We didn't know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We didn't know these were burial sites. The painted warnings were clear. The sealed passages were marked. But you opened them anyway. You brought groups of strangers to walk on the bones of our ancestors." I thought about the cave paintings, the symbols carved into the walls, the sealed passages that had been opened. By the recent floods, we'd been treating those areas like new tourist attractions, not understanding their true significance. "The missing tourists," I said. "Where are they?" "They rest with the ancestors now. They are part of the sacred ground they violated. You killed them. We protected what is sacred, as we have done for generations, as we will continue to do." The creature's eyes glowed brighter, and I could see the intelligence there, the sadness mixed with rage. These weren't monsters. They were guardians, protecting something they considered holy. "My daughter," I said. "She led a tour group here. She didn't know about the burial sites. The young guide lives. She showed respect when she saw the painted warnings. She did not laugh at the sacred symbols like the others." "What do you want?" "From us, promise that these passages will be sealed forever. Promise that no more tourists will walk on sacred ground. Promise that the burial sites will be protected." "I can't make that promise. I'm just a ranger. I don't make those decisions." "Then you will join the others on the stone shelves." The creature raised one massive clawed hand, and I saw how the other tourists had died. Not from violence, but from terror so complete that their hearts had simply stopped. The sight of these beings, the knowledge of what they were, had been too much for human minds to process. "Wait," I said. "I can help you. I know these caves better than anyone. I can make sure the burial sites are protected. You cannot speak for your people. You cannot control the hunger for profit that drives them to exploit sacred places. I can try. I can work with the Cherokee elders. I can find ways to preserve these areas without revealing their true nature." The creature studied me with those ancient eyes, and I felt like my soul was being weighed on some cosmic scale. "You know the Cherokee ways. Some I've learned from Pete, Crowfeather, and other elders. I know about the sacred sites, the burial customs, the respect that should be shown. Then you will undergo the test. You will spend 1 full day and night in the deepest chamber, in complete darkness, with only your knowledge and respect to protect you. If you survive, if you prove worthy, we will allow you to serve as guardian between our worlds. And if I fail, you will join the others." Tom and Marie were staring at me like I'd lost my mind, but I could see the intelligence in the creature's eyes, the possibility of a solution that didn't end with more death. "I accept," I said. The creature nodded, and the other 2 guardians moved forward. They didn't hurt Tom and Marie, but they guided them firmly toward a passage that led back to the main cave system. "You will tell no one what you have seen here," the creature told them. "You will report a cave-in accident. You will ensure that these passages are sealed and marked as geologically unstable." "What about Ernest?" Tom asked. "He will return when the test is complete. If he returns, I watched my friends disappear into the darkness, then turned to face the creature that would decide my fate. I'm ready, I said. The creature led me deeper into the cave system than I'd ever been, through passages that seemed to shift and change around us. We descended for what felt like hours, moving through chambers filled with ancient bones and artifacts, past underground rivers that flowed in impossible directions. Finally, we reached a circular chamber deep in the earth. The walls were covered with Cherokee symbols and cave paintings that told the story of the Guardians, warriors who had chosen to remain in the darkness, forever to protect their people's sacred places. Here you will wait, the creature said. Here you will face the darkness and the voices of the dead. If you can show proper respect, if you can prove you understand the sacred nature of these places, you will live to serve as guardian. What about my daughter? She will be safe. She has shown respect, but she must never enter these passages again. The creature left me alone in the chamber, and the darkness was complete. Not just the absence of light, but the presence of something deeper, the weight of centuries, the whispers of the dead, the sacred power that had been protected in this place for generations. I sat in the darkness and waited, and listened, and tried to understand what it meant to be a guardian of sacred ground. I survived the night, though I'm not sure how. The darkness was full of voices, Cherokee ancestors speaking in languages I didn't understand, telling stories of the sacred places that had been violated, sharing the pain of seeing their burial grounds turned into tourist attractions. When the creature returned, it looked at me with something that might have been approval. You did not panic, it said. You did not call for light. You listened with respect. I understand now, I said. I understand what we've been doing wrong. You will serve as guardian. You will ensure that the sacred places remain protected. You will find ways to keep the tourists away without revealing our presence. I will. The creature led me back through passages that seemed different in daylight, more normal, more like the caves I'd known for 18 years. When we reached the main chamber, Tom and Marie were waiting with a full search and rescue team. Kevin, I told them, geological instability in the new passages. We need to seal them permanently. The official report listed it as an accident caused by flooding and structural weakness. The passages were sealed with concrete and steel, marked as permanently dangerous. The Morrison tour group was listed as victims of a tragic cave-in there. Bodies never recovered, but I knew where they were. They were resting with the Cherokee ancestors, part of the sacred ground they had unknowingly violated. I developed severe PTSD after the incident. That's what the doctors called it. Panic attacks. Whenever I tried to enter the caves, nightmares about darkness and glowing red eyes. Inability to do the job I'd loved for 18 years. Sarah quit her job as a tour guide and moved to Louisville. She never asked me what really happened that night, but sometimes I catch her staring at the cave entrances with an expression of fear and understanding. The family tradition ended with me. I couldn't pass on the knowledge of what really lives in those caves, what guardians still protect the sacred places. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share. I work now with Pete Crowfeather and other Cherokee elders, helping to identify and protect sacred sites throughout the region. I can't tell them the whole truth, but I can help them preserve places that should remain untouched. Sometimes, late at night, I dream about the deep chambers where the guardians wait. I dream about red eyes in the darkness and voices calling. From the sacred ground, I dream about the weight of responsibility, about being a bridge between worlds that should never meet. The caves are still there. The tourists still come, but certain passages remain sealed, certain chambers stay dark, and certain burial grounds rest in peace. The guardians are still there too, watching, waiting, protecting what is sacred. And I am still there, keeping the promise I made in the darkness, serving as guardian between worlds, making sure that some places remain untouched by human curiosity and greed. The Cherokee were right about the new. Some things are too sacred to be seen, too dangerous to be disturbed, too important to be turned into tourist attractions. I learned that lesson in the deepest darkness, surrounded by the voices of the dead and the eyes of the guardians. I learned it well.